Hello everyone, I'm Jessica Zipf and I'm a PhD student at the University of Constance. Together with Mariana Shimabukuro, a PhD student at Ontario Tech University in Canada, we will present our Conjugate system, a dynamic FSM-based flashcard generator for learning Italian verb morphology. Before we start, we want to acknowledge and thank Sean Yama, who started helping us with the implementation as an undergraduate student and who has now joined the research team. He has done invaluable work on our tool, so thanks to you, Sean. We will start by looking at Italian verb morphology and how existing methods support learners in acquiring it. Afterwards, we introduce our carded language learning tool, first its backend and how the tool is capable to generate and analyze verbs, and then its front end with the user interface and the system design. After that, we present some evaluation results and finish off with a conclusion, limitations, and future work. So let's dive right in. If we compare Italian verb morphology with English, we see at the first glance that we have a more complex system. So in these two tables, we have the simple past, or in Italian, the imperfect of the verb to see, and we see that Italian has different endings for each conjugation form, whereas in English all 6 forms are identical. So Italian has a rich verb morphology and marks verbs for tense, mood, person, number, and sometimes even gender. So it's a complex conjugation system that learners need to acquire. One traditional way to study these conjugations is by using such tables as shown on this slide. Another common way is to use flashcards, that is, manually written cards that have a form on one side and its conjugation information on the other. However, these have to be written manually and are hard to share with other learners. Popular learning apps, for example Duolingo, focus mainly on repetition and on learning by memorize. Feedback mostly consists of simply saying incorrect or correct, but no explanations are provided. So these popular apps do not make use of the fact that metalinguistic awareness helps the language learning process. There are also some flashcard applications out there that allow teachers to control and assign tasks to their student. However, these usually involve the manual creation of cards, which easily becomes a very tedious and time-consuming task. And finally, there are apps out there that must either be bought or some freely available ones like Memrise that contain features that need to be bought in order to be able to use them. Now, our system differs from all those available applications. Carded does not require the manual creation of flashcards. Instead, users can simply interact and make use of the flashcards that the tool makes available. Additionally, we include error correction and explanations of linguistic concepts to raise metalinguistic awareness. This supports the learning progress and avoids learning simply by means of repetition. Additionally, Carded gives teachers the opportunity to train or test their students' learning progress. Therefore, we want to present Carded, a digital web-based flashcard application for learning Italian verb morphology.
Now, let's understand a little bit about the Carded's implementation by having a quick system overview. To simplify how Carded was implemented, we'll be splitting the implementation into 2 parts, the back end and the front end. The back end is represented by a Python server, which is responsible for most of the text processing and data management. And in the front end, we have a React.js server, which is responsible for rendering the user interface. Still on the back end side, we have the Python server interfacing with the FSM analyzer, which will be further explained in this presentation. But the FSM is responsible for creating and analyzing the verb forms and conjugations. Still in the back end, we have the Python server connected to the database, which is used the MySQL technology. The database is used for both buffering the data, like the verbs and analysis and conjugations, as well the user usage. the usage of the user. And finally, in the front end, we're going to have is the React.js server being able to gather all this data, pre-processed in the back end, and then rendering it in a user-friendly manner in a web-based application. We will now explain some details and design decisions related to the back end of the application.
The finite state morphological analyzer, short FSM, is the main engine of the app, supplying it with Italian verbs and their conjugation. A finite state machine can be described as a machine with a finite number of states and transitions between those states. We encounter examples of finite state machines in our everyday lives. For example, when we use a light switch. It has two states, the light being either off or on, and the transitions between those two states that correspond to the motion of pressing the button to either turn the light from on to off or vice versa. Now this technique can be applied to morphology, where the transitions correspond to lexical items and descriptions of these items represented by tags. For example, the finite state machine here contains the string cats by using 4 transitions and 5 states, and it also includes the morphological tags plus noun and plural. So it also gives us information about this lexical string. In natural language processing, NLP, FSMs are usually a small part of larger text processing pipelines. So for example, in automatic translation systems or speech recognition systems, FSMs are usually at the beginning of the pipeline, for example, to disambiguate between word categories. In our tool, the FSM is not just a tiny piece of a larger tool, but it's the main machine of our app. And it's leveraged as a dynamic form generator and analyzer in a language learning context. Thanks to the FSM, our system contains about 5,500 verbs so far, and our app can dynamically generate and analyze verb forms. Here I have an example of what generation and analyzing verb forms mean. So for analysis, we give the FSM a conjugated verb form. In this case, for example, the verb mangio. And it returns us its infinitive together with a couple of morphological tags that describe the given conjugation. So in this case, the FSM returns that mangio corresponds to the verb mangiare in present indicative first person singular. Now generation is just the other way around. We input an infinitive together with morphological information, and the FSM returns us the corresponding surface form. Why do we use this FSM in our carded language tool? Well, as a linguist, the first motivation is based on the fact that FSMs allow us to mirror regularities that occur in verb morphology. Many languages, just like Italian, contain different conjugation classes, and all verbs within one class behave identically, for example, in that they get the same conjugation suffixes. Thanks to the rule-based implementation of FSMs, we can mirror these irregularities. Additionally, learners and teachers using the tool do not need to manually curate a list of verbs. And finally, we link the morphological tags in the FSM to linguistic explanations, aiming to raise metalinguistic awareness to benefit the learning process. So in this example here, if we go back to the text for the verb mangio, we provide explanations of concepts like tense and mood, allowing learners to acquire a deeper understanding of those linguistic concepts instead of just simply memorizing forms. In the back end, we then integrate all the lexical data from the FSM into a MySQL database. This allows us to scale the system to multiple users at the same time. Moreover, we use the database to encode the morphological tags coming from the FSM into a user-friendly and common terms in language learning. So for example, the tag plus press is encoded in present in German, present in English and presente in Italian. So we can conclude that Carded allows learners to use the FSM analyzer wrapped in a user-friendly, web-based flashcards application. Or in short, it takes and wraps the FSM in a user-friendly package, making it a web-based flashcard application. So we have seen how we use the FSM and the database in the system's backend. Now Mariana will show you what this user-friendly application in the front end looks like.
In Carded, we focus on digitally augmenting the learner's experience when studying verb morphology with flashcards. We will now present Carded's main user interface functionalities. Carded supports learners across platforms because it runs in the user's web browser and it does not require installation. In the screenshots, we can see Carded running in both a laptop and in a mobile browser. Carded supports learners from different first language backgrounds. At the moment, we support English and German. While the main functions get translated to the selected language, the core linguistic features remain in Italian to increase language learning immersion. Now, before we dive deeper in the system's functionalities, we will introduce the concepts of cards, decks, and collections, and how they translate into our user interface. In the screenshot, we can see an example of a card, where on one side we have the concept being learned, in this case the verb form finito, and in the other side we have the corresponding conjugation. Each card can be organized into decks. For example, the card finito could belong to a deck for future tense. Decks, however, can also be organized into collections. In this example, the future tense deck containing the card finito could belong into a collection that's named, let's say, first year students. This is a sample of collections and decks. This flexible organization feature allows teachers and learners to customize and optimize their study and test materials. Let's say we want to add a new deck called Venire under Futuro Semplice collection. The deck is now created, and it's empty, containing 0 cards. Now, to add cards into this deck, we can go to Verb Search, type Venire, and select Futuro Semplice filter. This will result on all verb forms of Venire in the Futuro Semplice tense. We can now individually select cards or select all. To add cards into our deck, let's select the Futuro Semplice collection and the Venire deck. The cards were successfully added into the Venire deck. If selected, a learner can study or get quizzed on the cards belonging to the Venire deck. For studying, the learner can use the Flip Cards mode, which allows one to hover and flip the cards, which works similar to the traditional flashcards. The Spell Conjugation mode allows the learner to practice answering the verb forms to each card. They can also get quick feedback as they work through each card, as the interface is able to display correct and incorrect information. Now, let's say the learner is feeling confident with their knowledge in this deck, so they can choose a quiz type of activity in order to evaluate their knowledge. Carded has 3 different quiz modes: Conjugate, Identify Tense, and Mixture. In the Conjugate mode, the activity requires learners to input the correct verb form for a given conjugation. If in doubt, the learner can use a hint, which displays multiple choices instead. When the learner selects or types the correct choice, Carded checks it as correct and the learner can proceed to the next activity. If the learner chooses or types an incorrect answer, the system displays the correct answer and feedback information on cards related to their given input. This can help learners to understand their mistake more. In the Identify Tense mode, learners are given a specific verb form and are required to choose the correct tense. Like in the Conjugate mode, if the correct answer is chosen, the learner may proceed to the next activity. Otherwise, Carded will display the feedback along with the correct answer. Lastly, the Mixture mode randomly chooses either a Conjugate or Identify Tense type of activity for each of those cards in the deck.
After we created the concept and have a first prototype online, we decided to get some feedback. So we interviewed 2 Italian teachers from the Language Learning Institute at the University of Constance. The overall feedback was very positive. They mainly commented on the engaging and interactive character of the learning and testing methods, and very well received was the informative feedback. That is, in the quiz mode, if the learner gives an existing verb form that does not match the target, the system returns to which form the user's input corresponds. Suggestions on how to improve the system included to add example sentences, since it seems a bit abstract otherwise. They further suggested to include prepositions, since these interact with verbs. For example, we know in English that there's a difference between to speak to someone, to speak of someone, to speak about someone. And of course, this can also be transferred to Italian. As you saw in the video, when you conjugate a verb in our system, the app sorts first, second, and third plural in a horizontal alignment. Now, one teacher suggested to use a vertical alignment instead, since that also corresponds to the table style of learning. During the test session, one teacher added the imperfect of various forms of various verbs into one deck. She then would have liked to filter the deck for a specific verb, which so far is not possible. So she suggested to include a filtering system into the decks. Based on these results, we plan to include example sentences with prepositions, a spaced repetition model. Such a model selects cards according to user's performance. So in that it purposely repeats cards that the learner got wrong in previous learning sessions. We want to add gamification, so we want to use a point system to get away from the correct and incorrect counters and to focus on the learning progress instead. We also want to add some other gamification elements in order to generally raise engagement. We'd like to include an Italian grammar to use other exercises that put these verbs in a context, in a sentence context. For example, in filling the blank tasks. We plan to implement French as a third user interface language alongside English and German. And we'd like to add a French FSM to build a similar language learning tool for French verb morphology. We'd like to crowdsource some functions to allow users to upload images representing the cards, to input example sentences, and to input audio for pronunciation. So this concludes our presentation on our card system. We want to thank you for listening to us, and we'd like to encourage you to try our system yourself. We have created a user account in our live system that you can use to log in and play around with the tool. Simply use the provided link here together with the user login and you're good to go. We are always happy about some feedback to get new ideas and to see how we can improve our system. So if you want to leave us some comments, you can simply use this Google form to let us know. Enjoy Carded, and thanks again for listening to us, and we really hope to see you at EuroCall 2021.